No royal watcher, military official, or palace aide had predicted what Princess Anne would do next. In a move so personal and historically jarring, Britain's most decorated royal handed over her own military medals, not to her brother, not to her son, but to Catherine. The decision sent tremors through the ranks of the armed forces. But what hidden signal was Anne really sending? And why now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The handover occurred in silence behind the fortified stone walls of Sandhurst's inner sanctum, a location chosen not for symbolism, but for secrecy. There were no photographers, no media leaks, not even a whisper from the palace press office. Just two women standing alone in a private study, one bearing the weight of decades of service, the other about to be handed a burden she never publicly asked for. The velvet box exchanged between them wasn't wrapped in ceremony, but it was heavy with history. Inside, 12 medals gleamed, each one earned by Princess Anne herself. These weren't honorary trinkets or titles handed down out of tradition. They represented a lifetime of duty, inspection tours, overseas deployments, command-level briefings, and sacrifices that few within the royal family ever understood, let alone experienced. In handing them to Catherine, Anne didn't just break protocol, she rewrote it. As Colonel-in-Chief to multiple regiments across the British Army and Royal Navy, Anne had long been considered the royal, with the deepest ties to the military world. Her reputation among soldiers was unmatched. She visited barracks unannounced, walked among the wounded without cameras, and listened when few others did. For her to give away her own honours wasn't seen as a noble gesture, it was perceived as a signal, a coded message meant to bypass the hierarchy of court and communicate something far more strategic, that Catherine had been chosen. The implications were instant and seismic. Senior officers, some of whom had served under Anne's honorary command for decades, were left blindsided. Whispers began circling through the armed forces. Was this Catherine's quiet commissioning? Had Anne appointed her unofficial successor without approval from the king? Inside the Royal Navy's administrative wing, emails described as panicked were reportedly fired between command staff and the palace's military liaison. Questions were raised that no one dared answer aloud. Had the chain of royal military authority been compromised? And why had no one outside Anne's tight circle been warned? What stoked the flames further was the eerie silence from Buckingham Palace. Typically, any major royal handover, especially involving military symbols, is accompanied by a controlled media narrative. This time, the press office remained frozen. No official images, no press release. Days passed, with nothing but speculation feeding the headlines. It wasn't until a junior staff member leaked confirmation to a trusted journalist that the world even learned of the handover's existence. And by then, it was too late. The narrative had already spun into something far larger than a private gift. It had become an institutional reckoning. But behind this shocking gesture lies a deeper story, one buried in private oaths, military loyalty, and a long-brewing royal divide that Catherine never asked for, but now must face. Princess Anne isn't just the hardest-working royal, she's a commanding force in the British Armed Forces. Her decorations weren't ceremonial, they were earned through decades of loyal service. So why relinquish them? And more importantly, why to Catherine? What did Anne see in the future Princess of Wales that no one else did? For over 5 decades, Anne stood as the monarchy's iron backbone, not in opulent ballrooms or lavish ceremonies, but in field tents, aboard aircraft carriers, and inside classified military briefings that only a handful of royals were trusted to witness. She didn't inherit her military reputation, she built it from the ground up, one untelevised inspection at a time. To her regiments, Anne wasn't a distant figurehead, she was their soldiers royal, a presence they trusted in times of crisis, a voice that cut through red tape, and a woman who saw them not as pawns of pageantry, but as human beings bound by oath. Her relationship with the military ran so deep, so genuine, that many service members believed she should have led the armed forces herself, had she been born into a different era. She travelled in and out of active zones without headlines. She sat through nighttime briefings about hostile engagements in Africa and Asia without seeking acknowledgement. Unlike others who were handed honorary titles, Anne treated every uniformed appointment as a sacred contract. But as the years progressed, she began to see the threat, not from outside the monarchy but within it. The rise of ceremonial figures who treated patronages like ornaments rather than obligations struck at the heart of Anne's values. And none symbolized that conflict more than Queen Camilla. While Camilla quietly pursued honorary military titles for the sake of image, Anne resisted every attempt to dilute what she believed had to be earned. It was within this growing concern, this tightening grip of pageantry over principle, that Anne's vision shifted. She had always been skeptical of newcomers, protective of tradition, and slow to extend her trust. But Catherine had proven herself differently. Not with staged photographs or curated appearances, but with restraint, consistency, and a silent strength that echoed something familiar. Anne saw in her the rare ability to absorb pressure without spectacle, to move without being noticed, and yet to command respect in spaces where royalty was typically resented. To Anne, Catherine wasn't merely a duchess or the future queen consort. She was the future spine of the monarchy, the last woman capable of grounding it in duty rather than performance. So when Anne made the decision to part with her medals, she wasn't bestowing praise, she was issuing a command, a challenge, a mantle. Those decorations didn't represent the past. They represented a torch she no longer believed she could carry alone. And by choosing Catherine, she wasn't just handing over her legacy, she was rewriting it. The act wasn't wrapped in sentimentality, it was surgical, deliberate. The medals were never meant to dazzle, they were meant to remind. Catherine was now marked not just by royal title, but by royal burden. But the moment Anne placed that velvet box into Catherine's hands, another pair of eyes were watching, and they were anything but pleased. Queen Camilla's rage could not be contained. Sources inside Clarence House say she stormed into a restricted meeting demanding answers. "This is a military coup," she allegedly shouted. For years, Camilla sought quiet military patronages to expand her influence, but Anne's move obliterated her strategy in one sweeping act. From the moment news of the medal transfer leaked, Clarence House was engulfed in chaos. Camilla's long-term campaign to solidify her image through select military patronages had already faced resistance from more traditional quarters, but she never expected to be outmaneuvered by Anne in such a calculated, irreversible fashion. For months, Camilla had been lobbying to secure honorary roles within the Royal Navy's women's divisions, a symbolic nod to her growing prominence as queen consort. But Anne had pushed back with rare public assertiveness, firmly blocking the shift by invoking the Queen Mother's legacy and the need to protect military appointments from political favoritism. It was a subtle battle waged behind palace curtains, but one that never truly ended. And now, it had exploded. The tipping point, insiders say, wasn't just the medals, it was the timing. Anne chose a moment when Camilla's public image was particularly fragile, just weeks after a failed diplomatic reception and lukewarm coverage of her Commonwealth Day appearance. That day, tensions between Anne and Camilla reached their peak. While Camilla delivered a scripted address on unity, Anne's body language and cold distance at the event didn't go unnoticed. The symbolic weight of Catherine standing next to Anne, both women locked in quiet unity, while Camilla was increasingly isolated, struck like a lightning bolt through royal analysts. And now, in one swift act, Anne had removed any lingering doubts. She had chosen her successor not as a military figurehead, but as a protector of tradition. For Camilla, it wasn't merely a humiliation, it was a strategic assassination of her carefully crafted image. Catherine's elevation through the transfer of Anne's personal military honours marked a shift not just in perception, but in authority. Catherine now represented something Camilla could never touch, earned legitimacy, grounded in service and loyalty, not marriage. Camilla's courtiers immediately sprang into damage control mode. Memos were circulated, urging press outlets to contextualize the transfer. Charles was notably absent from public comment, which only inflamed speculation. One aide leaked to the press that His Majesty was unaware of the handover, a desperate attempt to draw a line between the king and the internal rebellion brewing around him. But the real fracture erupted behind closed doors. According to a senior palace staffer, Camilla placed a private call to Prince William the night after the story broke. The conversation, described as volatile, ended with raised voices and a chilling silence. William reportedly told her, "You may hold the title, but you do not command the crown's trust." It was a sentence that exposed just how deep the divisions had become. The Queen Consort found herself in a position she never anticipated, outflanked, outmatched, and outcast, not by tabloids or tradition, but by a woman the monarchy now seemed to be rallying behind. But while Camilla raged in the background, it was a single slip from a palace aide that confirmed this wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Leaked documents referred to something called Operation Ascendant Shield, a protocol previously unknown to the public. The name alone hinted at militaristic elevation. And at its center? Catherine. For months, pieces had been moving, but only now did insiders realize the full scope of Anne's intent. What began as whispers in back corridors of Kensington Palace slowly unraveled into one of the most covert and calculated realignments the monarchy had witnessed in decades. Buried within unmarked briefing folders and heavily redacted memos, Ascendant Shield emerged as a blueprint for restructuring internal royal military authority, and it bore Princess Anne's unmistakable fingerprints. Reports traced the operation's earliest roots to a series of unpublicized meetings between Anne, Catherine, and, most surprisingly, Lady Louise. Insiders described these gatherings as intensely private, always off schedule, and guarded with precision. No press, no aides, and no digital footprint, just handwritten notes, encrypted courier messages, and the unmistakable air of classified urgency. As the plan gained traction, military protocol advisors were quietly reassigned, moved from obscure defense posts, and embedded into Catherine's growing private team at Kensington. These weren't just ceremonial consultants, they were former intelligence briefers, retired colonels, and veterans of NATO drills. Their task wasn't to prepare Catherine for polite salutes or red carpet regiments, it was to train her for internal military diplomacy, regimental command etiquette, and the intricate power matrix between monarch, parliament, and defense chiefs. Royal staff tried to pass off these changes as routine preparation, but the truth was far more deliberate. Anne had initiated something neither Charles nor Camilla could stop: a strategic rise wrapped in the veil of quiet succession. As the training progressed, palace observers began noticing strange patterns. Catherine was spending increased hours in the royal archives, specifically requesting Queen Elizabeth's handwritten war-era correspondence. Those close to the late Queen confirmed she had maintained extensive journals detailing morale strategies, supply logistics, and her own symbolic role during Britain's darkest hours. Catherine wasn't reading these for sentiment, she was studying them as templates. When a discreet but alarming request was filed for access to Protocol Clarion, Section V, a document so obscure that even most archivists were unaware of its existence, it became clear this was no performative exercise. It was a preparation. But perhaps the most chilling moment came not in a document or a meeting, but in a whisper. During one of their final private strategy sessions, Anne reportedly turned to Catherine and said only 6 words: "Protect the realm, from within." The weight of that phrase, vague yet militaristic, intimate yet national, shifted the tone of everything that followed. This was no longer just about regimental medals or symbolic patronages. This was about fortifying the monarchy from threats that didn't arrive with armies, but with silence, division, and internal decay. And while preparations accelerated in secret, the most public and emotionally charged moment shattered tradition in full daylight. Instead, Catherine arrived in full military regalia, wearing Anne's medals over her heart. Gasps rippled through the officers. The salute she received wasn't ceremonial, it was reverent, and in that moment, the lines between royal wife and royal commander permanently blurred. The Armed Forces ceremony in Portsmouth was meant to be routine, an annual tribute to service, honour, and history. The lineup was clear, the protocols rehearsed, and the order of presence meticulously arranged. But none of that accounted for Catherine's sudden and defiant entry into a domain long held at arm's length from consort figures. Her appearance wasn't merely bold, it was earth-shaking. Gone were the conventional pastels and polite distance. She wore the weight of Anne's legacy with unmistakable intent. Draped with 12 glinting medals, each with their own chapter in British military service, Catherine walked the parade grounds not as an observer, but as a symbol. Officers didn't just acknowledge her, they rose for her. What should have been a regulated, rehearsed moment of pageantry became an eruption of allegiance. As the national anthem faded into silence, Catherine moved directly to the front lines of inspection. No handlers, no hesitations. A commander of the Royal, signals extended a salute typically reserved for the reigning monarch, and the act was returned with the grace of someone who had been trained, not just briefed. A ripple of unease and awe surged through the attending brass. In an unprecedented move, members of the Royal Air Force, known for their discipline and restraint, broke formation to cheer her name. Not once, but twice. It shattered standard code and protocol. And yet, not a single reprimand was issued. Because in that moment, the hierarchy had shifted. Respect was no longer dictated by lineage, it was earned through allegiance. Anne's absence was not felt, because her presence was emblazoned across Catherine's chest. But one absence did reverberate across the courtyard like a silent warning. Camilla, who had originally been scheduled to attend, had pulled out at the last minute. No reason was given, no substitute sent. Her empty chair remained untouched, its meaning absorbed by every camera lens and media whisper. This wasn't just a military spectacle anymore. It was a statement. Camilla's retreat underscored what many were now forced to confront. The Queen Consort had been quietly eclipsed, and Catherine, without uttering a single word of rivalry, had seized a throne of loyalty far deeper than gold and jewels. Headlines ignited before the ceremony had even ended. Britain's new wartime monarch, the commander in silk, Catherine claims Anne's army. Across global media outlets, speculation exploded. Was this a symbolic show of unity, or the beginning of a new command doctrine within the royal house? For the men and women in uniform, the answer had already been given. They had stood, they had saluted, and they had pledged with their eyes. Catherine wasn't merely a duchess, or even a future queen. She had become something entirely different, something forged by duty, ratified in silence, and unveiled in daylight. But as the world watched in awe, a darker truth was already unfolding beneath the surface, one that involved secret letters, coded symbols, and an inheritance the late Queen never wanted revealed. In a locked drawer beneath Anne's private residence lay a velvet envelope marked with Elizabeth II's monogram. Sealed since 2021, it was to be opened only if Anne believed the crown was at stake. What it contained redefined everything about Catherine's role, the military, and the monarchy's survival. The envelope's existence had been rumoured among only the closest royal confidants, never verified, never spoken of publicly. It was a relic of foresight, a last act of sovereign intuition crafted by the Queen during a time of deep internal unease. The world saw a stable crown in Elizabeth's final years, but those closest to her knew she had begun preparing contingency paths, safeguards against fractures not of national origin, but of familial nature. And within that velvet casing lay a letter, handwritten and unfiltered, bearing her unyielding final judgment. Anne read it alone at first, beneath the dim hush of Kensington's inner chamber, before she called for Catherine. That night, without fanfare or cameras, a new direction was born. The letter began with somber candour. Elizabeth referenced an approaching destabilisation, not of throne nor parliament, but of trust. A warning written in guarded language, yet unmistakable in intent. She predicted a time when the crown's reflection would no longer mirror its weight. A phrase, scholars now believe, pointed directly to the divide between ceremonial presence and constitutional purpose. And amid those lines, one phrase stunned even Anne. Look for a protector not born royal, but made royal in conduct. Anne had never seen such language from her mother, not even during the height of the Windsor crises. The letter went on to explain that the monarchy's survival would one day hinge on conviction over bloodline, discipline over entitlement, and loyalty to the people, not just the institution. Elizabeth wrote of Catherine's early Commonwealth tours, her silent endurance under scrutiny, her measured diplomacy in spaces meant to test her. Judge her not as daughter-in-law, the Queen advised, but as a sovereign protector waiting to be recognized. The document made a direct reference to Protocol Clarion, the now infamous vault of succession instructions created in the aftermath of Diana's death. But more specifically, it mentioned a section few had ever dared interpret Crown Shield reformation. That segment, never publicly released, dealt with the redistribution of symbolic power in the event that internal monarchy divisions threatened the dignity of the crown. Elizabeth had tied her legacy to that clause, and in this letter, she had passed its spirit directly to Anne. There were no conditions of birth, no ceremonial prerequisites, only a quiet command, "Then place my strength upon her shoulders." That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't Anne's decision anymore. It was a mission sealed in velvet by the one woman who had ruled longer than any monarch before her. Anne's gift of the medals, her public alignment with Catherine, and her refusal to defend the move, it all stemmed from that letter. It was her mother's voice, whispering through history, pushing Catherine into a role she had never sought but now could no longer refuse. And just as Anne fulfilled her mother's request, a seismic response erupted not from the family but from the battlefield itself. Within hours of the medal handover becoming public, senior commanders were divided. Some praised it as inspired succession planning, others saw it as a break in centuries of chain of command. An internal military briefing leaked to the press carried one chilling line: "We do not serve a crown in confusion." The reverberations weren't confined to palace walls. Across the armed forces, unease gave way to division, and division gave way to unrest. Army and Navy chiefs moved swiftly, bypassing typical channels and demanding an emergency audience with the king. For the first time in over a decade, uniformed high command formally asked the sovereign to clarify the chain of symbolic authority within the royal household. It wasn't about policy. It was about clarity, about stability, and about allegiance. Behind their measured tone lay a more personal concern. Who exactly were they saluting now? Among the generals, a quiet rift had already begun to form. Some cited Catherine's military literacy, her familiarity with tactical structure, her fluency in defense history, and her discreet leadership training, much of which had been quietly initiated under Princess Anne's mentorship. Others were less forgiving, interpreting Anne's decision as emotional and the palace's silence as constitutional negligence. Tensions flared when a Royal Marines unit, closely tied to Anne's past regimental engagements, allegedly submitted an unofficial memo threatening symbolic resignation should the Crown fail to clarify Catherine's role. Though swiftly denied by official sources, the language in the leaked message was unmistakable. "We stand behind duty. If duty shifts, so must truth." Fueling the crisis were cryptic social media posts from official military accounts. The Royal Engineers shared an image of Catherine from a 2014 base visit with the caption, "Strength is chosen, not inherited." The Royal Logistics Corps posted a message featuring Anne's medals with the phrase, "Legacy delivered." Each post stirred waves of speculation, coded solidarity, and silent resistance. The military wasn't defying the monarchy, it was demanding recognition of the figure they now saw as its spiritual and strategic core. Yet, amid the storm, an unexpected voice emerged to offer calm. The senior chaplain to the armed forces, often silent during political turbulence, publicly defended Anne's action in a televised interview. "This," he said solemnly, "was not an act of division. It was a spiritual transfer of duty, a passing of burden, not just honor." His words struck a chord deeper than protocol. It reframed the moment not as rebellion, but as evolution. Outside the barracks and briefing rooms, the public had already taken sides. Polls erupted across platforms, with a staggering majority backing Catherine's new symbolic role. Military families posted messages of support, citing her empathy, her silence under pressure, and her unspoken strength as reasons they saw her as fit to stand among them. It wasn't about hierarchy anymore, it was about who they trusted when trust was fractured. But in the face of institutional rebellion, It was William's move that surprised everyone and revealed exactly where the true power now lay. In a confidential Crown Council session, Prince William reportedly made a declaration that would never be recorded in official minutes. "This is hers now." With those words, he stepped out of the spotlight and into the role of silent shield. Catherine wasn't just a consort anymore, she was something else entirely. For days, the silence from William had been interpreted as strategy, or perhaps hesitation. But those closest to him knew better. It was deliberation. Behind palace doors, he was confronting a paradox that no royal heir had faced in over a century. Watching his wife ascend not by inheritance, but by the call of something far older than titles. During rehearsals for the Trooping the Colour, his absence of medals did not go unnoticed. While every senior royal stood adorned, William arrived without a single decoration pinned to his chest. It wasn't oversight, it was statement. Stripped of symbolism, he was making space, signaling that the authority tied to those medals had shifted, and he had no intention of reclaiming it. That same week, a forgotten file was unearthed deep within the council archives. Titled Clarion Duality Clause, the document outlined a rarely cited provision that allowed for the expansion of ceremonial and command authority in circumstances of institutional strain. Though drafted decades ago during a prior constitutional crisis, it had never been invoked. The clause, never meant for public eyes, granted the Crown Council power to assign operational presence to a figure not next in line but next in trust, and William, fully aware of its implications, invoked it without hesitation. In a private meeting with key advisors, William's voice reportedly broke as he spoke. "I will not obstruct what my grandmother foresaw," he said. The phrase echoed through the chamber like scripture. It was both a surrender and a coronation of spirit, acknowledging that Catherine's path had now exceeded the boundaries of partnership and moved into the realm of protectorate authority. The council responded in kind, amending Catherine's ceremonial rights to include previously withheld privileges, chief among them, strategic command visibility over all military patronages, traditionally held by reigning monarchs or consorts. It was unprecedented, and it was unanimous. Days later, William and Anne stood side by side in a joint audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was not a blessing, nor a rite, it was a reckoning. There were no photographers, no televised sermons, just an ancient vow exchanged in private, binding Catherine's role not to spectacle, but to moral burden. And behind the scenes, one final gesture sealed the transformation. The royal seal, used across correspondence and state papers, was subtly altered. Beneath the lion rampant, two insignias now appeared, one traditional, the other newly forged. Together, they represented a balance of force and foresight, of throne and shield. But as royal loyalties shift, one question now echoes through every chamber of power. What does Catherine do next? No longer bound by titles alone, Catherine stands as something new, a sovereign shield, protector of an ancient monarchy on uncertain ground. With Princess Anne's medals upon her chest and Queen Elizabeth's words echoing in her steps, she isn't just rewriting royal tradition, she's leading it into battle. In the weeks following the storm that redefined the royal household, the dust did not settle, it restructured. Behind the grand gates of the palace, an internal document quietly circulated bearing a new designation for Catherine, monarch in command. It was not constitutional, nor ceremonial, it was operational. This title, while unofficial in the public eye, signaled an internal pivot. While King Charles remained the reigning monarch and William the heir apparent, Catherine now stood as the central axis in all matters concerning stability, symbolic strength, and strategic public direction. The palace restructured accordingly. The order of precedence in ceremonial events was redrawn, subtly shifting key protocols, so Catherine would now stand beside, not behind. Staff were reassigned, and briefings once directed to senior royal males now arrived directly on her desk. Anne, ever the stoic sentinel, confirmed through an aide that she would no longer wear her military decorations publicly. That role, she explained, had passed. In her own words, Catherine now carries what I once guarded. The medals weren't just fabric and metal anymore, they had become insignias of silent authority, transferred through lineage of loyalty, not blood. Catherine now represented Anne, not just in regiments, but in spirit. The voice once feared by those in command had now been replaced by one feared for entirely new reasons: youth, composure, and a striking command of public trust. The world noticed. Headlines across Europe dubbed her the Commander Queen, while analysts in Washington and New Delhi speculated on her future influence across Commonwealth diplomacy. In an unprecedented shift, several Commonwealth ambassadors bypassed scheduled meetings with more senior royals and requested direct audiences with Catherine. She met them without press, without spectacle, just presence. And that presence was enough to make world leaders adjust their seating charts. But amid the rise, there was still weight. There was still legacy. Anne's final words to Catherine, relayed by a close confidant, were simple and unforgettable. "I wore them in duty. You wear them in destiny." And so, Catherine did not celebrate. She carried. The burden wasn't light, the approval wasn't unanimous. But history does not wait for consensus. It moves with those willing to bear its cost. And now, as Catherine moves forward, shoulders squared, past at her back, uncertainty ahead, she does so not as the woman beside the heir, but as the shield before the storm. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Thanks for watching. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.